In a packed courtroom, Judge Edward Chen's mocking laughter echoes as he challenges Attorney General Pam Bondi. But her fierce response ignites a legal firestorm that questions the very heart of justice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the mahogany-paneled courtroom in Washington, D.C. The air was thick with anticipation, every seat filled with reporters, legal scholars, and spectators whispering in hushed tones. At the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, U.S. Attorney General, her jaw set, eyes like steel. Across from her, behind the towering bench, sat Judge Edward Chen, his expression a mix of amusement and disdain. The tension between them crackled, a live wire ready to spark. Bondi was in court to defend the Trump administration's aggressive immigration crackdown, specifically a controversial executive order that expedited deportations of undocumented immigrants, including those with no criminal records. The policy, enacted in early 2025, had drawn fierce criticism for its broad scope and alleged violations of due process. As Attorney General, Bondi was the administration's legal spearhead, tasked with justifying the order before Chen, a federal judge known for his meticulous scrutiny of government overreach. Chen, appointed during the Obama era, had a reputation for challenging policies he deemed unconstitutional, and today he was ready to dissect Bondi's defense. The case had erupted into a national flashpoint. Protests raged outside, with signs demanding justice for all, clashing against chants of "secure the border." Inside, Chen leaned forward, his glasses glinting as he addressed Bondi. "Ms. Bondi," he began, his voice laced with a sardonic edge, "do you expect this court to simply rubber-stamp an order that sidesteps basic constitutional protections? Or is the Department of Justice now in the business of rewriting the law to suit political whims?" A ripple of laughter from the gallery followed, sharp and biting. Bondi's face didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around her pen. Chen's challenge wasn't just procedural, it was personal. He viewed Bondi's unwavering loyalty to the administration as a betrayal of legal impartiality. Her public statements, including a Fox News appearance where she called judges opposing the policy low-level leftist obstructions, had infuriated him. To Chen, Bondi wasn't just defending a policy. She was weaponizing the Justice Department to erode judicial independence. His laughter was a gauntlet thrown, a dare for her to justify her stance or crumble under scrutiny. Bondi rose, her heels clicking against the floor as she approached the podium. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but laced with controlled fury, "this administration acts to protect American citizens, not to coddle those who flout our laws. The executive order is lawful, necessary, and within the President's authority." She cited precedents, rattling off case law with precision, but Chen's smirk didn't fade. He interrupted. "Precedents? You're cherry-picking, Ms. Bondi. This court isn't a stage for political theater." The room gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline. Bondi's eyes narrowed, but she pressed on, detailing the policy's safeguards, though Chen's interruptions grew sharper, each one a jab at her credibility. "You speak of safety," he said, "but what of the families torn apart? The children left behind? Or is that collateral damage in your crusade?" The gallery erupted in murmurs, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Bondi's composure held, but her voice grew colder, each word a calculated strike. As the hearing stretched on, the confrontation escalated. Chen's questions weren't just legal, they were moral, probing Bondi's motives and the administration's endgame. Bondi countered with data, arguing the policy deterred illegal crossings, but Chen waved it off. "Numbers don't justify injustice," he snapped. The exchange was a chess match, each move raising the stakes. Spectators leaned forward, riveted by the clash of wills. Then, Bondi paused, her gaze locking onto Chen's. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "if this court believes it can dictate executive power, it's Not me who's overstepping. The room fell silent. Chen's smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. Had Bondi just accused him of judicial overreach? The audacity hung in the air, a spark waiting to ignite. What would she say next, to turn this battle in her favor? The courtroom held its breath, the silence so thick it seemed to pulse. Pam Bondi's words, "If this court believes it can dictate executive power, it's not me who's overstepping," hung like a blade, slicing through the tension. Judge Edward Chen's steely glare bore into her, his fingers twitching on the bench as if restraining an urge to slam the gavel. The gallery, a sea of wide eyes and scribbling pens, waited for the next move in this high-stakes duel. Bondi's accusation of judicial overreach was a bold gambit, one that could either cement her as a fearless defender of executive authority or paint her as a reckless provocateur. Chen leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. "Ms. Bondi, are you suggesting this court lacks the authority to review the actions of the executive branch? Because that's a dangerous precedent you're flirting with." His words were measured, but the underlying challenge was clear. Back down or double down. The spectators shifted, sensing the confrontation veering into uncharted territory. Bondi didn't flinch. She adjusted her stance, shoulders squared, and met his gaze with an intensity that seemed to burn through the room. "Your Honor," she said, her tone sharp yet controlled, "this court has every right to review, but not to obstruct. The executive order was crafted to address a crisis: border security, economic strain, public safety. You dismiss the data, but the numbers don't lie. Illegal crossings have dropped 15% since the order took effect." She gestured to a stack of reports on the podium, her movement deliberate. "You call it injustice, but what about the communities bearing the cost of unchecked immigration? Are their voices less valid?" Chen's jaw tightened. Bondi's pivot to the human cost was strategic, forcing him to engage on her terms. He countered swiftly. "You speak of communities, Ms. Bondi, but what of the individuals? The order you defend deports people without hearings, without due process. You're not solving a crisis, you're creating one." His voice rose, carrying a moral weight that resonated with the gallery. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, though others shook their heads, loyal to Bondi's hardline stance. The exchange grew fiercer, each word a volley in a war of ideals. Bondi leaned into her argument, citing the president's constitutional authority to protect national security. "The executive branch doesn't answer to activist judges," she said, her voice rising. "We answer to the American people." The gallery erupted, some clapping, others hissing. Chen banged his gavel, the sound sharp but barely quelling the chaos. "Order!" he snapped, though his eyes never left Bondi. "You're treading on thin ice, Ms. Bondi. This court isn't a soapbox for campaign rhetoric." Bondi's lips curled into a faint, defiant smile. "With respect, Your Honor, I'm not here to campaign. I'm here to defend the law." She produced a document, holding it aloft like a weapon. "This is a sworn affidavit from Border Patrol, detailing the strain on resources before the order. Officers overwhelmed, facilities overcrowded. You want due process? We want order. One enables the other." The move was calculated, grounding her argument in frontline testimony. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a viral soundbite. Chen wasn't swayed. He leaned back, arms crossed, his voice dripping with skepticism. "An affidavit doesn't erase constitutional violations. You're asking this court to prioritize expediency over rights. That's not justice. It's expediency dressed up as law." The gallery buzzed, divided between those who saw Chen as a guardian of liberty and those who viewed him as an elitist obstructing progress. Bondi's eyes flashed, but she held her ground, her next words chosen with precision. "Then let's talk rights," she said, her voice slicing through the noise. "The right of citizens to safety, to jobs, to a system that doesn't collapse under its own weight. You accuse me of politics, but isn't it political to ignore half the country's concerns? The accusation landed like a grenade, challenging Chen's impartiality. His face darkened, and for a moment it seemed he might explode. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice a dangerous whisper. Careful, Ms. Bondi. You're not just defending a policy, you're questioning the integrity of this bench. The room froze. Bondi's gamble had pushed the confrontation to a razor's edge. Had she gone too far, or was this the moment she'd seize control? Every eye was on her, waiting for the move that could redefine the battle. The courtroom's silence was a living thing, taut and trembling. As Pam Bondi stood poised at the podium, her gaze locked on Judge Edward Chen. Her accusation, that he was politicizing the bench, had electrified the room, leaving spectators and reporters hanging on her next words. Chen's warning, delivered in a venomous whisper, still echoed, "You're not just defending a policy, you're questioning the integrity of this bench." Bondi's gamble teetered on the brink of disaster or triumph, and the air crackled with the weight of what she'd do next. She inhaled sharply, her voice steady but laced with defiance. "Your Honor, I question no one's integrity. I question priorities. This court prioritizes procedure over people, people who live in fear because our borders are porous. The executive order isn't perfect, but it's action. What's your solution? Endless hearings while communities suffer?" Her words were a calculated thrust, shifting the focus from Chen's authority to his inaction. The gallery stirred, some nodding, others glaring, the divide in the room palpable. Chen's eyes narrowed, his composure fraying. "Ms. Bondi, don't lecture this court on suffering. Your order creates it. Families separated, lives upended, all without a shred of due process. You call that action? I call it recklessness." His voice was a whip, cracking through the room. Spectators gasped, and a reporter's pen skittered across her notepad. Chen's moral outrage was a shield, but Bondi saw an opening. She leaned forward, her tone icy. "Recklessness, Your Honor? Or is it reckless to let a broken system fester? The Department of Justice isn't tearing families apart. Decades of inaction did that." The gallery erupted, cheers and boos colliding. Chen slammed his gavel, the sound like gunfire. "Enough!" he roared, his face flushed. "This is a court, not a town hall." But the chaos only fueled Bondi. She pressed on, her voice rising. "You want due process? We're streamlining it, not eliminating it. Every deportee gets a review. Faster, fairer, funded by reallocated resources. Or would you rather we bankrupt the system to appease critics?" She slapped a budget report onto the podium, the sound sharp, her evidence piling up like armor. Chen wasn't cowed. He leaned back, his voice dripping with contempt. "Streamlining? You're gutting rights to meet quotas. Your reviews are shams, rubber stamps for deportations. This court won't sanctify that." His words were a gauntlet, daring Bondi to prove her policy's legitimacy. The tension was suffocating, each exchange a step closer to a breaking point. Reporters typed furiously, their screens glowing with phrases like "Bondi vs. Chen" and "Courtroom Showdown." Bondi's eyes flashed, but her voice dropped, deliberate and cutting. "If this court won't sanctify action, then what? Paralysis? You strike down the order, and what changes? The border stays open, resources dwindle, and the American people pay the price. That's not justice, it's surrender." The accusation landed like a blow, framing Chen as an obstacle to progress. The gallery buzzed, divided between those who saw her as a patriot and those who viewed her as a tyrant. A woman in the back shouted, "Tell him, Pam!" while another hissed, "Shame on you!" Chen's face was stone, but his knuckles whitened. On the gavel, "Ms. Bondi, you're not here to dictate policy. You're here to defend the law. And this order? It's a legal abomination." He held up a copy of the executive order, its pages marked with red ink. No hearings, no appeals, just deportations. You call that fair? His voice trembled with controlled fury, and for a moment, the room saw not a judge, but a man wrestling with the weight of his role. Bondi seized the pause, her next move a gamble that could shift the entire case. "Your Honor," she said, her voice low, almost intimate. "Fairness isn't free. It's built on order. Strike this down, and you. Don't just tie our hands, you invite chaos. Is that your legacy?" The question was a dagger, personal and piercing. Chen's eyes widened, his breath catching. Had Bondi just dared to define his judicial reign? The room held its breath, waiting for the explosion that would reshape the fight. The courtroom was a pressure cooker, every gaze fixed on Judge Edward Chen as Pam Bondi's words, "Is that your legacy?" sank in like a blade. Her challenge, delivered with a chilling intimacy, had struck a nerve, and Chen's widened eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability before his face hardened. The gallery, a tangle of hushed whispers and tense anticipation, felt the weight of the moment. Bondi had turned the tables, framing Chen not as a guardian of justice, but as a potential architect of disorder. The air thrummed with the promise of an impending clash that could redefine the case. Chen's voice, when it came, was a low growl, each word deliberate. "Ms. Bondi, you presume to lecture this court on legacy? Your order sacrifices liberty for expediency, and you dare speak of chaos? You're building it." His hands gripped the bench, knuckles pale as he leaned forward. "This court's legacy is upholding the Constitution, not bowing to political pressure." The gallery stirred, some clapping softly, others murmuring dissent. Bondi's expression didn't waver, but her eyes burned with a fire that promised she wasn't done. She stepped closer to the podium, her voice rising with controlled fury. "The Constitution, Your Honor. It also grants the executive power to protect this nation. You call it pressure. I call it responsibility. The chaos I'm fighting is real. Overrun border towns, strained schools, hospitals turning away citizens. You sit here, insulated, while Americans bear the cost." Her words were a scalpel slicing into Chen's moral high ground. She held up a photograph, a grainy image of a crowded border facility. "This is reality, not theory. Tell me, what's your plan for this?" The gallery gasped. The photo a visceral jab. Reporters zoomed in, cameras clicking. Chen's face twitched, his composure tested. "Ms. Bondi, theatrics won't sway this court. That image doesn't justify stripping rights. Your order bypasses due process, plain and simple. You're not solving chaos, you're codifying cruelty." His voice carried a righteous edge, resonating with those in the crowd who saw him as a bulwark against authoritarianism. But Bondi was ready, her counterattack swift. "Cruelty?" she shot back, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Cruelty is letting a system collapse under its own weight, leaving everyone, citizens, immigrants, to drown. Our order prioritizes order. Yes, but it funds legal aid, trains officers, speeds up reviews. You call it a bypass. I call it a lifeline." She slapped a policy brief onto the podium, the sound echoing. "Read it, Your Honor. We're not monsters. We're problem solvers." The move was bold, forcing Chen to confront her evidence, or risk seeming dismissive. Chen's eyes flicked to the brief, but his voice was ice. "A lifeline? Your reviews are a farce. 5 minutes per case, no appeals, no transparency. You're not solving problems, you're sweeping them under the rug." The gallery buzzed, divided as ever. A man in the back muttered, "She's right. Fix the system," while a woman nearby hissed, "Fix it with fairness." Chen raised a hand, silencing the crowd, but his focus stayed on Bondi. "You claim to serve the people, but whose people? Not the ones you're deporting." Bondi's jaw tightened, but her voice dropped, dangerously calm. I serve the law, Your Honor, and the law demands balance. You strike this order down, you tip the scales toward anarchy. You talk of fairness, but where's the fairness for citizens begging for relief? She paused, letting the question linger, then leaned in. You want to talk cruelty? Look at the victims of crimes committed by those who shouldn't be here. Their families deserve justice too. The gallery erupted, cheers and jeers colliding. Chen's gavel cracked, but the noise barely dimmed. His face was a mask of fury, his voice a blade. Ms. Bondi, you're manipulating tragedy to justify tyranny. This court won't be complicit. He held up the executive order again, its pages trembling in his grip. This violates everything the law stands for. Bondi didn't blink, her next words a calculated risk. Then prove it, Your Honor. Strike it down and own the fallout. But when the system breaks, don't blame me. The challenge was a spark, daring Chen to act and face the consequences. The courtroom was a battlefield, the air thick with the aftershock of Pam Bondi's dare. Strike it down and own the fallout. Judge Edward Chen's face, flushed with barely contained rage, betrayed the weight of her challenge. His trembling grip on the executive order mirrored the tremor in the room, where spectators sat riveted, their breaths shallow. Bondi's words had thrown down a gauntlet, forcing Chen to choose between striking down the policy and risking chaos, or upholding it and compromising his principles. The gallery, a mosaic of divided loyalties, waited for his response, pens poised, cameras rolling. Chen's voice, when it broke the silence, was a controlled burn. Ms. Bondi, you speak of fallout as if this court fears consequences. The only fallout I see is the erosion of justice under your order. You demand I prove its illegality? The evidence is in its execution. Thousands deported, no hearings, no recourse. He jabbed a finger at the order, his voice rising. This isn't law, it's a decree, and this court will not bow to it. The gallery erupted, some cheering, others jeering, the divide stark. Bondi's eyes narrowed, her posture rigid, but she was ready to strike back. She leaned into the podium, her voice a razor. Your Honor, you call it a decree, but it's a response to a crisis you refuse to acknowledge. You speak of justice, but where's the justice for citizens whose towns are collapsing under the strain of illegal immigration? You want hearings? We're funding them. 3 new processing centers, staffed and ready. You say no recourse? Every case gets a review. She slid a folder across the podium, its pages thick with data. The numbers don't lie, but you're ignoring them to grandstand. The accusation was a grenade, painting Chen as a performer rather than a judge. The gallery gasped, the audacity of her words igniting whispers. Chen's face darkened, his voice a low snarl. Grandstanding? Ms. Bondi, you're the one waving props like a politician. Your reviews are a sham. 2 minutes per case, no legal counsel, no appeals. You call that justice? I call it a mockery. He tossed the folder aside, the gesture dismissive, sparking murmurs of approval from his supporters. But Bondi didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her heels clicking, her voice steady but venomous. A mockery? The mockery is a system that lets lawbreakers exploit loopholes while citizens pay the price. You want to talk props? Look at your bench, elevated, untouchable, blind to the real world. The room exploded, shouts of "She's right!" clashing with cries of "Disrespect!" Chen's gavel slammed, the sound a thunderclap, but the chaos barely subsided. Order! He bellowed, his eyes locked on Bondi. You will not insult this court's purpose. Your order is a constitutional violation, plain and simple. You're not saving the system. You're dismantling it. His words carried a moral weight, resonating with those who saw him as a defender of rights. But Bondi was relentless, her next move a calculated escalation. Your Honor, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. Dismantling? I'm rebuilding. Your way, endless delays, bloated budgets, has failed. Our order cuts the fat, speeds the process, protects the nation. You call it a violation? Prove it in law, not rhetoric. She held up a legal brief, its pages marked with precedents. Here's your proof. Cases upholding executive action in times of crisis. Read them, or admit your ruling on bias. The challenge was a direct hit, questioning Chen's objectivity. The gallery buzzed, some shouting support, others, condemnation. Chen's hands shook, his voice ablaze. Bias? Ms. Bondi, you're the one serving a political agenda. Your brief cherry-picks cases to justify tyranny. This court sees through it. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. You want law? I'll give you law. Your order fails the due process clause, and I'll strike it down unless you show me otherwise. The ultimatum was a spark, daring Bondi to produce a defense that could sway him. The room held its breath, every eye on her. Bondi's lips curled into a faint, defiant smile. Then let's talk due process, Your Honor. I have evidence, testimony from the ground, data, legal grounding, that proves our order stands. Will you hear it, or shut it down? The question was a trap, forcing Chen to engage or risk seeming closed-minded. What would she reveal next to tip the scales? The courtroom was a crucible, every eye locked on Pam Bondi as her challenge. Will you hear it, or shut it down? Hung in the air like a lit fuse. Her faint, defiant smile was a signal she was ready to unleash something seismic. And Judge Edward Chen's steely gaze betrayed a flicker of wariness. The gallery, a restless sea of whispers and anticipation, sensed the confrontation teetering on a knife's edge. Bondi's trap was set. If Chen dismissed her evidence, he'd look biased. If he engaged, he risked legitimizing her defense. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the room pulsed with the promise of a revelation that could shift the battle. Chen leaned forward, his voice taut with barely restrained fury. Ms. Bondi, this court is always open to evidence, but it won't be swayed by your theatrics. Present your testimony, but know this. No amount of data will whitewash an order that tramples due process. His words were a challenge, daring her to produce something substantial or falter under scrutiny. The gallery stirred, some murmuring support for Chen's resolve, others eager for Bondi's next move. She adjusted her stance, her eyes glinting with determination, and reached for a thick dossier on the podium. Your Honor, she began, her voice steady but charged. This isn't theatrics, it's truth. This dossier contains sworn statements from Border Patrol agents, local sheriffs, and community leaders. They detail the crisis before our order. Crime spikes, overwhelmed hospitals, schools turning away local kids. Our policy isn't the villain, it's the response. She opened the dossier, pulling out a letter, its seal prominent. This is from a Texas mayor, begging for relief. His town's budget is gutted, his people scared. You call our order tyranny? He calls it survival. The gallery gasped, the letter a visceral blow. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment. Chen's jaw tightened, his voice sharp. A letter, Ms. Bondi? Anecdotes don't make law. Your order deports people without hearings, without counsel. That's not survival. It's oppression. He waved a hand dismissively, but the gesture lacked conviction. And Bondi pounced. Oppression? She countered, her tone icy. Oppression is ignoring the cries of your own citizens. Our order funds legal aid. $10 million reallocated to ensure counsel for deportees. You say no hearings. We've streamlined them, cutting wait times from years to months. She slapped a chart onto the podium, its bars showing reduced processing times. This is due process, Your Honor. Efficient, not absent. The gallery erupted, cheers clashing with boos. Chen's gavel cracked, but the noise only swelled. Order! He shouted, his face flushed. "Ms. Bondi, your streamlining is a sham. Cases rushed, rights ignored. You're dressing up injustice as efficiency." His words resonated with those who saw him as a protector of fairness. But Bondi was relentless. She leaned forward, her voice ablaze. "Injustice? The injustice is a system that lets illegal entrants clog courts while citizens wait. Our order balances the scales. Faster reviews, funded counsel, protected borders. You want fairness? This is it." Reporters typed furiously, headlines forming. Bondi's bold defense versus Chen's stand for rights. The gallery was a powder keg, some shouting, "Fix the border," others, "Stop the cruelty." Chen raised a hand, silencing the crowd, but his eyes never left Bondi. "You speak of balance, Ms. Bondi, but your order tips the scales toward authoritarianism. No amount of funding excuses denying appeals." His voice trembled with conviction. But Bondi saw an opening, her next move a gamble to redefine the narrative. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm, "authoritarianism? That's rich from a bench that blocks elected officials from acting. Our order is legal, upheld by precedents I've cited, grounded in executive power. You want appeals? We're building a system for them, funded and staffed. Strike this down, and you don't just halt progress, you fuel division." She held up a news clipping, its headline screaming, "Border crisis worsens." "This is what you're enabling. Will you face that truth, or hide behind procedure?" The question was a dagger, personal and piercing. Chen's face was stone, but his hands betrayed a slight tremor. "Ms. Bondi, you're not here to lecture this court on truth. Your order fails the Constitution, and no clipping changes that." His voice was a whip, but Bondi's smile widened, sensing blood. "Then let's test it, Your Honor. I'm ready to call a witness, a Border Patrol chief who will swear to the order's impact. Will you hear him, or silence him?" The challenge was a spark, daring Chen to act, or risk exposing his limits. The courtroom was a tinderbox, Pam Bondi's challenge. "Will you hear him or silence him?" igniting a palpable tension that gripped every soul in the room. Her smile, sharp and unyielding, clashed with Judge Edward Chen's stony facade, his trembling hands the only sign of the storm within. The gallery, a restless mosaic of divided passions, leaned forward, sensing the confrontation's climax. Bondi's call for a witness was a masterstroke, forcing Chen to either engage her evidence or risk appearing as a gatekeeper of justice. The air crackled with anticipation, every eye on Chen as he weighed his response, the weight of the case and his legacy bearing down. Chen's voice, when it came, was a low, measured blade. "Ms. Bondi, this court silences no one. Call your witness. But know this: testimony won't erase the constitutional rot at the heart of your order." His words were a gauntlet, inviting Bondi to make her case while reinforcing his resolve. The gallery buzzed, some whispering approval of Chen's openness, others eager for Bondi's next move. She nodded, her expression steely, and signaled, to the clerk. "The United States calls Chief Daniel Torres, Border Patrol, El Paso Sector." The room stirred as a weathered man in uniform took the stand, his face etched with years of frontline strain. Torres swore in, his voice steady but heavy. Bondi approached, her questions precise. "Chief Torres, describe the situation at the border before the executive order." Torres's eyes scanned the room, then settled on Chen. "Overwhelmed, Your Honor. Agents burned out, facilities at triple capacity, crime spilling into towns. We couldn't keep up." Bondi pressed. "And after the order?" Torres straightened. "Arrests down 20%, crossings halved. The order gave us breathing room, resources, staff, order." The gallery murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. Bondi turned to Chen. "This is the impact, Your Honor. Real people, Real results. Chen's gaze was piercing, his voice sharp as he interjected. Chief Torres, does order justify deporting families without hearings? Without counsel? Torres hesitated, then answered. Sir, we follow the law. The order funds lawyers, speeds reviews. It's not perfect, but it's better than chaos. Chen leaned forward, unrelenting. Better for whom? Not the children. Left behind. The gallery gasped, Chen's moral jab landing hard. Bondi's eyes flashed, but she pivoted. Your Honor, the order protects children. American children, in overburdened schools, unsafe streets. Chief Torres proves it works. The testimony fueled the fire, each side digging in. Chen grilled Torres on due process, extracting admissions, of rushed reviews, while Bondi countered with data showing funded legal aid and reduced backlogs. The gallery was a cauldron, shouts of justice clashing with secure the border. Chen's gavel slammed, but the chaos only underscored the case's stakes. As Torres stepped down, Bondi faced Chen, her voice a controlled blaze. Your Honor? You've heard the truth. Our order is legal, effective, necessary. Strike it down, and you unravel progress. Uphold it, and you balance justice with reality. Chen's face was unreadable, his voice steady but heavy. Ms. Bondi, this court weighs law, not expediency. Your order violates due process. No testimony changes that, but I see the crisis you describe. He paused, the room hanging on his words. I'm issuing a partial ruling. The order's core stands, but deportations without hearings stop. A revised process, with mandatory counsel and appeals, must be implemented within 60 days. The gallery erupted, cheers and boos colliding. Bondi's jaw tightened, a mix of triumph and frustration. She'd saved the policy but lost its teeth. Chen raised his gavel, silencing the room. This ruling isn't a victory for either side. It's a demand for better. The law bends for no one, but it serves everyone. Bondi nodded, her eyes fierce but respectful, accepting the compromise. As a hard-won step, outside, protests raged, pundits debated, and social media exploded, some hailing Chen's balance, others decrying his restraint or Bondi's influence. The ruling sparked a firestorm, forcing the nation to grapple with its legal system's limits and possibilities, a debate that would echo for years.